Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a role you probably thought was glamorous. Being a medieval king sounds majestic, right? Golden crowns, roaring feasts, loyal subjects kneeling at your feet. But tonight, you're going to find out why none of that feels even remotely restful. In fact, it's downright exhausting. You'll be sleeping on straw, waking up before the birds, judged by scheming nobles, and force-fed boiled turnips in a castle so cold the stone walls literally sweat. You'll lead armies in armor you can't sit down in. You'll survive court politics, jester geese, and maybe, just maybe, your own family. And spoiler, you probably won't survive this job for 24 hours without either crying, quitting, or faking your own death. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and the local time down below. I love seeing where you're listening from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Morning misery. You're a medieval king now, which sounds impressive until you realize you're basically a glorified prisoner in your own castle, surrounded by schemers, superstition, and zero central heating. Right now, you're waking up not because you feel rested, but because you've been awakened by a monk. Again, he smells faintly of onions and unshakable moral authority. He's reading from a wax tablet about today's meetings, prayers, judgments, and a mandatory embroidery viewing. It's not even dawn. The room is dim because windows are for rich people in the 20th century. You've got arrow slits. The walls weep cold. The mattress underneath you, stuffed with straw and probably a few rats, is about as soft as royal policy. Your feet find the icy floor. You've already stubbed your toe on a chamber pot someone forgot to empty. Or maybe that someone was you. It's 5:30 a.m. You're technically the most powerful person in the realm, and yet you haven't had a single unsupervised moment in 2 decades. Outside your wooden door, 2 guards wait. They're not there to protect you from assassins. They're there in case you try to sneak away. Last week, you tried to escape your own coronation rehearsal. You were found under a tapestry pretending to be a broom. Your clothes aren't really yours. They're chosen for you, layered on you, by squires who avoid eye contact while tying your codpiece. Today, it's stiff brocade dyed with crushed insects, lined with linen you'd swear came from a ship's sail. The crown, a delicate circlet of gold and rubies, is placed on your head, but feels like an anvil of responsibility and hair loss. And don't even think about skipping morning prayers. The chapel is freezing. The candles drip wax like it's their job, and your confessor has the energy of a sad goat. You mumble Latin, you half understand, and kneel on stone floors that were designed more for penitence than comfort. Outside the courtyard echoes with the clang of blacksmiths and the moaning of peasants, dragging carts of something vaguely agricultural. You own all of it, in theory, but if you tried to walk outside unannounced, you'd cause a minor uprising, or worse, have to answer questions. The people love asking questions. Why are taxes so high? Can you bless their goats? Did you really knight a chicken? The answer to all of those is yes, but none of it matters now. Breakfast looms. You haven't even started your day, and already your nose is running. Your back is sore, and you've been reminded twice that your sovereignty is only as solid as the next nobleman's loyalty. And loyalty in these parts is cheaper than a wooden spoon. The funny thing, historians still argue whether kings actually had any real privacy. Some say you ruled with divine right. Others say you were just a puppet in a robe held together by tradition, terror, and tax revenue. Either way, your day is just beginning, and it's about to get worse, because now it's time for breakfast. And as you'll soon discover, nothing says absolute power quite like dry bread, lukewarm beer, and 5 squabbling barons trying to marry their niece to your face. Welcome to the throne. A royal breakfast. You sit at the long oak table, hunched beneath a vaulted ceiling that leaks slightly when it rains, and it's always raining. The fire in the hearth spits with more smoke than warmth, and your breakfast is precisely what you feared. 3 chunks of dry trencher bread, 2 slices of yesterday's cheese, and a pewter mug of lukewarm ale that smells vaguely like wet hay. A king's feast. Around you the nobles shuffle in. They do not knock. They never knock, because they believe deep down that they are the real power behind the throne. And in many cases they're right. The Duke of Northmarch, an elderly man with a mustache, like a feral squirrel, coughs dramatically and clears his throat. Again. Then again, you suspect he's doing this just to assert dominance over the meal. Beside him, the Earl of Glavin tries to one-up him by bringing out a tiny harp and softly plucking it as he discusses land disputes. This is not a breakfast. This is a political cage match in tights. No one asks you if you'd like a moment to eat. Because your appetite is irrelevant, your presence is symbolic. You are here to listen, nod, and occasionally say things like, "Indeed, very well," or "that shall be considered." And if you dare to try an original thought, say suggesting that maybe the grain tax is too high, prepare for an hour-long debate involving scrolls, grudges, and someone quoting scripture you're fairly sure they misread. The bread crunches like gravel. You chew slowly while four different noblemen argue about borders, bandits, and the exact interpretation of royal favor. One insists his third cousin should be granted a barony because of a bloodline traced back to a goat who allegedly licked the feet of St. Magnus. You nod solemnly. You've heard worse justifications. Meanwhile, your steward quietly whispers to you that the royal treasury is dangerously low, something about too many winter festivals and imported swan feathers. You consider this while biting into a boiled egg so overcooked it bounces. Historians still argue whether kings had actual say in their finances, or whether they were just guilt-tripped into approving whatever the court accountants handed them. The answer, somewhere between ceremonial hostage and fancy rubber stamp. You consider faking a fainting spell, but last time you did that, your physician bled you, then fed you garlic water until you hallucinated a conversation with Saint Benedict. So now you just stare blankly ahead and imagine being a goat herder or a blacksmith. Anyone whose job doesn't involve having to pretend to care about Lord Armand's new moat. And then your least favorite sound, the trumpet of a surprise messenger. A sweaty rider, wide-eyed and breathless, is ushered into the room. Everyone watches him like vultures waiting to pounce on bad news. The rider kneels. He presents a scroll. He says the word you dread most in the English language, petitions, which means after breakfast you'll be expected to sit on the cold judgment bench while people from all corners of your dominion come to beg for justice, mercy, or the right to own more sheep. And you will smile, stroke your chin thoughtfully, and pray none of them speak in a dialect you can't decipher, still chewing your cheese like it's made of tree bark. You realize you've been staring at the same mold spot on the wall for 7 minutes. You think about saying something funny, maybe lighten the mood, but the last time you made a joke, someone misinterpreted it as a law. And now there's an entire village where wearing green on Thursdays is illegal. So you say nothing. You sip your tepid ale, nod at the man still playing the harp, and wonder how many generations of your ancestors suffered through this exact scene. Probably all of them. The chamberlain taps your shoulder gently. Time to move to the great hall. Your breakfast is over, which is to say, the part of the day where you were allowed to sit down is over. From here on out, it's standing, judging, smiling, pretending, enduring. And the real tragedy, you'll be hungry again in an hour. Getting dressed like a prisoner. The moment you rise from the breakfast table, your freedom, already imaginary, is locked even tighter in ceremonial linen wool and a constellation of metallic discomfort. Dressing isn't something you do as a medieval king. Dressing is something that happens to you. First, a valet brings the underlayers, thin linen undergarments that itch with the persistence of a moral lesson. The cloth is supposedly imported flax from Flanders, if your tailor is to be believed, but it feels like someone wove it out of sarcasm and thistle. Then come the woolen hose, one for each leg, pulled tight and tied with colored ribbons that your court insists reflect seasonal temperament. Today it's deep blue for piety, or melancholy, or perhaps both. Then the padding, layers upon layers of quilted gambeson meant to prevent your armor from gnawing your bones raw, but which mostly just makes you sweat like a terrified bishop. Over that, the chainmail is carefully draped, 1,000 little metal links that weigh down your limbs and clink every time you shift, like a haunted cutlery drawer. And then, as if the sheer weight of politics weren't enough, the regalia is placed upon you. The ceremonial robe dyed in maddening purples and stitched with enough gold thread to bankrupt a monastery. It has no pockets, no comfort, just embroidered lions and fleur-de-lis that scratch your arms like judgmental whispers. Now the crown. Not the big one, they save that for coronations and portraits, but the medium-sized one just heavy enough to remind you of your failings. It digs into your temples with imperial dignity. There's a smudge on one of the rubies. You say nothing. Historians still argue whether royal clothing was actually meant to intimidate, or if it simply evolved into a competitive game of who can look the most like a walking tapestry. Some kings, it said, wore so much fabric they needed attendants just to walk 5 paces without falling into their own sleeves. But it's not just for show. The clothing tells the realm you are more than a man. You are a symbol. You don't itch because you're wearing wool. You itch because you represent an entire metaphysical hierarchy where peasants labor, nobles plot, and you poor thing exist as a stitched together compromise between God and taxation. Even worse, you're forbidden to remove any part of it in public. To appear crownless is to appear vulnerable. Once you removed your gloves to scratch your own nose, this caused a baron's wife to faint and rumors of demonic possession to circulate for 3 weeks. You try to shift your shoulders. The chainmail shifts with you, a reluctant dance partner made of regret and metallurgy. Your back is already sore and it's only mid-morning. Judgment and petitions. You trudge into the great hall, your every footstep echoing with the dull clang of ceremonial boots, which incidentally do not bend. They are shaped like the idea of a foot, not the experience of having one. As you walk, a small boy tugs on your robe. You recognize him vaguely. He's someone's heir. He looks up at you and asks in all innocence, "Is it fun being king?" You resist the urge to scream. You smile instead, nod gravely, and tell him it is a great honor. Then your crown slides slightly sideways, and you spend the next 20 minutes pretending not to notice. You reach the dais, sit down on the throne of authority, a carved oak monster of a chair that looks majestic from a distance, but feels like sitting on an insult. There are no cushions. Comfort apparently is not majestic. The advisors flank you. A herald unrolls a scroll the length of a canoe and begins reading out the list of petitions for the day. You attempt to lean back and immediately regret it. Your shoulder pad stabs your neck. A chainmail loop pinches your armpit. The robe tangles around your ankles. It occurs to you that a scarecrow has more freedom of movement than you do. And just then a small louse scurries down your sleeve. You say nothing, because dignity apparently is also embroidered. You are seated now, technically, but calling it sitting is generous. You're more perched, wedged into the throne of authority like a roasted quail in a display dish. Your ceremonial robe bunches uncomfortably beneath you. The chainmail presses into your spine, and you're already regretting the boiled egg from breakfast. Before you, the great hall stretches out like a corridor of obligation. There are tapestries, yes, mostly depictions of dragons that were probably sheep, but they don't warm the space. The air is damp, the floor cold, and the atmosphere is heavy with incense and unmet expectations. The herald clears his throat, loudly, too loudly, and with that sacred rasp, the daily parade of human ambition begins. First up, your cousin. No, not that cousin. The other one. Or possibly your cousin's third nephew, on your mother's bastard side. It doesn't matter. He's a man with too much velvet and too little self-awareness. He kneels dramatically, like he's auditioning for sainthood, and requests a modest grant of land currently inhabited by 6 dozen farmers and a very productive goat. He presents a family tree as evidence. It looks like someone spilled wine on a spider. You nod slowly, say something diplomatic, and mark it for further consideration, which in royal terms means never speak of this again unless someone dies. Next, a knight, broad-shouldered, sunburned, and smelling faintly of mead and mildew. He declares he's returned victorious from quelling a minor rebellion or possibly starting one. Hard to say. He requests a title, a keep, and, of course, permission to wed your second cousin's daughter, who rumor has it smells like boiled cabbage and speaks exclusively in riddles. Historians still argue whether such courtship requests were truly about politics or whether knights simply viewed the royal family as a kind of aristocratic dating service. Either way, you're forced to pretend this isn't the 7th time someone's tried to marry into your bloodline this week. You wave him on. The next petitioner shuffles forward. This one's a merchant, nervous, jittery, with a scroll clutched in sweaty hands. He has grievances, always grievances. His trade caravan was overtaxed. His wagons were stolen, his son fell into a moat. He'd like reparations justice and ideally a tax exemption. for life. You're tempted to grant him a royal hug and a lifetime supply of oatcakes just to watch the nobles twitch. But alas, oatcakes are for peasants, and you are not allowed to be impulsive. That's what counselors are for. One leans in now, whispering something about precedent and trade law and setting a dangerous example. You nod solemnly while your inner monologue screams for silence. And then, yes, the priest. There's always a priest. This one's from a coastal abbey, requesting funds to build a bell tower visible from heaven. You suspect he means visible from the next valley. Either way, the drawings look suspiciously like a giant stone chalice, which he claims is metaphorical. You raise an eyebrow. He weeps. You approve a modest donation. Everyone pretends not to notice that he smells like wine. At this point, you've lost all feeling in your left leg, your right foot has fallen asleep, and there's a suspicious itch developing beneath your gambeson. You glance down discreetly. It's probably just another flea. Maybe two. That's the thing they never tell you in fairy tales. The royal court is less about velvet and victory, more about parasites, both literal and social. The fleas are a constant. No amount of sage smoke or powdered wormroot will truly keep them away. You've seen lords scratch themselves raw beneath their robes, smiling all the while. Dignity is an illusion held together by heavy fabrics and wishful thinking. And the human parasites, they're worse. They smile wider, flatter harder. They say things like, "My liege, I have always admired your wisdom," while positioning themselves for your downfall with the elegance of a chess move. You play along because you must. The next man claims to be descended from a Roman general and says he's owed a forgotten province on the edge of the forest. He has a map drawn in crayon. You nod thoughtfully. You say, "This is most intriguing." You file the map under creative fiction. Then there's a woman, finally, a noble widow with a voice like smoke and the eyes of someone who's buried 3 husbands and 2 rivals. She doesn't kneel. She simply asks for a word in private. Your advisor's tense. You, however, are just impressed. She leaves behind a sealed note that smells faintly of roses and ambition. You don't read it yet. You enjoy a little mystery. Finally, your herald announces a break. But not for you. For him. His voice is hoarse. His arms are tired and he needs water. You glance at the line of remaining petitioners stretching out like a slow-moving river of desperation. It will continue after lunch. If you're lucky, maybe fewer than 3 will cry and no one will try to gift you a blessed pig again. Last week's still hasn't stopped squealing in the royal stables. You shift slightly in your throne. The crown tilts, and you smile. Because this is only the morning audience. The afternoon is when the real problems arrive. Bath time. So, it's finally time for what passes in your royal circle as freshening up, which is a polite way of saying, you're about to dunk yourself into history's worst attempt at a spa day. You're led down a drafty corridor to the royal bath chamber, which is not so much a chamber as it is a glorified storage room, with a tub in the middle and a cracked window that lets in the breeze and possibly judgment. The scent inside is layered, a complex bouquet of mildew old soap lavender and something distressingly similar to pickled fish. The tub is wooden oval and very much used. The water has not been changed since the feast 3 days ago. The page boy bathed before you this morning, and the stable master before him yesterday, and someone's greyhound possibly the day before that. No one is entirely sure, but it's warm. Not because it's been heated, oh no, that would require firewood logistics, and someone to be blamed if it's too cold. No, it's warm in the way a pond gets warm, through time friction and a complete absence of standards. You lower yourself into the murky depths with all the grace of a man descending into betrayal. The water hugs you like a bad decision. Your skin immediately regrets its choices. A servant hands you a sponge made from what might be moss. You're supposed to rub this across your skin in gentle circles while humming a psalm according to some outdated court manual. You skip the psalm. You skip the rubbing. You sit motionless and attempt to ascend spiritually. Next comes dental hygiene, or what the court calls tooth cleansing, which involves a willow twig, the frayed end of which has been soaked in salt and sage. You're expected to chew and brush at the same time, working the gritty fibers across your molars like a man sanding a wooden chair. You gag once, twice, then finish. Your teeth feel violated, but technically cleaner. Now comes hair. You have 2 options, vinegar or ashes. Today's blend is vinegar with a hint of rosemary. It stings your scalp and smells like an herbal argument. The servant pours it slowly while muttering something about warding off scalp spirits. You suspect she made that up. You're toweled off with something resembling a horse blanket. It scratches. You say nothing. And then, because appearances matter, you're dabbed with a homemade cologne, a paste of rosewater mint and powdered deer gland. You now smell like a haunted apothecary. It is apparently a compliment. Historians still argue whether medieval kings actually bathed regularly or if the whole thing was mostly for ceremonial effect. Some claim that monthly bathing was seen as excessive. Others insist that kings were paragons of hygiene compared to their court. The truth, likely somewhere between twice a month and whenever the fleas stage a coup. But no matter the truth, today is a bathing day, which means you are now, by royal decree, clean. You're redressed quickly, layers reassembled, like a complicated sandwich of fabric and pride. The crown is back, slightly askew, but you've stopped correcting it. You suspect it's slowly rebelling. Now your nails. The royal manicurist arrives with a tiny dagger, a nail file made of bone, and a look that says she'd rather be anywhere else. She trims with the precision of someone filing parchment, occasionally mumbling something about bad humors. You smile weakly and try not to flinch. At one point, your foot twitches involuntarily. She stabs the floor instead of your toe. Both of you pretend it never happened. Your page boy now, back in the room, and suspiciously damp, offers your gloves, lined with rabbit fur and embroidered with the royal seal. You slip them on, aware they smell faintly of last week's roast. And just like that, you're presentable. Or rather, you are a representation of someone who is clean, healthy, and in control. Because that's what hygiene is here, a performance. A bit of fragrant theater designed to assure your court that their king is unblemished, unbothered, and definitely not scratching at something beneath his belt buckle. You take a deep breath. The mint paste cologne burns your nostrils. You walk back through the halls, head held high, robe trailing behind you like a royal tail. Servants bow, nobles murmur. You overhear someone say, "His Grace is looking especially pine-scented today." A win by medieval standards. But deep down, you know the truth. You are not fresh. You are not clean. You are just slightly less offensive than usual. And that's what passes for success around here. Entertainment or endurance. You've done your duty for the morning. Judge nodded, endured multiple layers of ceremonial itch. And now it's time for what your advisors refer to as leisure, which is a polite way of saying you're going to sit motionless on a chair that looks like it was built during the collapse of Rome, while people perform aggressively in your direction. This is called entertainment. It is also called suffering. First comes the court jester, a man dressed in patchwork bells and unmedicated ambition. His name is Jorvik, though you sometimes suspect he's actually 4 different jesters stitched into one. He bounds into the hall, juggling 3 live geese, which is impressive until one bites him mid-arc and flaps into a tapestry, unraveling half of the Battle of Caerwyn scene. Nobody comments. Not out loud. You smile tightly. Your lips form the shape of amusement, but your eyes remain dead. This is expected. A king must not laugh too much. It is unseemly to look as though you are enjoying anything, especially not while taxes exist. The geese are wrangled. Jorvik moves on to impressions of your nobles, your bishop, your cook. He even does you, which is risky. He hunches, squints, and says in a nasal tone, "I am His Majesty, ruler of all, slayer of boils, lover of turnips." The court titters. You allow a single eyebrow to rise. It's practically a standing ovation. Behind the throne, you hear a rustling. You hope it's the wind. You know, it's rats. They've taken to nesting under your chair recently. The royal carpenter set traps. The rats apparently set counter traps. One of your footmen lost a toe. You've named the largest rat Duke Nibbles. He's the only one who truly understands your reign. The jester moves on to a musical number. It involves a lute, 2 singing pigs, stuffed, thank heavens, and a chorus of monks humming out of tune. You zone out for a full 10 minutes and only snap back when something explodes in a puff of flour and feathers. Jorvik bows. Everyone claps. You nod regal and slow. Your inner voice screams. Next, a troubadour arrives. His hat is taller than your crown, which already makes you dislike him. He sings of your victories, many of which you were either not present for or actively tried to stop. His Majesty did ride through flames, with hair unburned and sword of fame, he chants. You did no such thing. You once got winded walking up a tower. Historians still argue whether court entertainment was genuinely amusing to monarchs, or simply tolerated like a recurring rash. Some say jesters were confidants, even truth tellers. Others say they were human distractions designed to soften the blow of being a human figurehead. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between comedic therapy and state sponsored mockery. Now come the dancers. A dozen of them, faces painted feet, stomping in unison. Their outfits are brightly colored and jingling like over-caffeinated sleigh bells. One falls mid-spin and lands face first into a ceremonial plant. No one reacts. You silently commend their commitment. A whispered voice from your side. Your chaplain reminds you to look mildly inspired, as these dancers were a gift from the southern provinces. You nod slowly. You think about soup. Finally, a trained bear is brought in. It's wearing a vest. It plays a drum. It has more rhythm than most of your nights. Your people cheer. You wonder if the bear knows what it's doing. You wonder if you know what you're doing. And then Mercy Entertainment ends. Your steward announces that the leisure interval is concluded, which means you are now free to begin afternoon mass. 2 diplomatic correspondences and a discussion about relocating the royal dung heap. As you rise, your knees pop. The jester gives a dramatic bow, winks at you, and slips something into your sleeve. A tiny scroll. You read it later. It simply says smile once, just once, for yourself. You'll probably have him executed, but not today, because something in that stupid note makes you pause. You look around your glittering, threadbare hall full of flattery feathers and faint mildew and think, what is the point of all this? And then your crown slips forward again, and you remember the point is to endure it, because that's what kings do. Royal medicine, aka torture. At last, you're granted a break between meetings. A moment your chamberlain insists to tend to your physical humors, which sounds suspiciously like torture with extra vocabulary. You're led into the royal infirmary, a room that smells of burnt rosemary sweat and aggressive optimism. The windows are shuttered to keep out disease-bearing spirits, which means the air is thick and unmoving. A pot of something herbal bubbles ominously in the corner. It could be medicine. It could be stew. It could be both. Your royal physician, Master Wulfric, greets you with the vigor of a man who reads more entrails than books. He bows so low his beard brushes the rushes. Then he stands, claps his hands, and says the words no king wants to hear. Let us begin with the bleeding. You sigh resigned. The bleeding is for your headache, which you got from being king, but which is now assumed to be the result of overheated humors. Wulfric pulls out his ceremonial knife. Why he has a ceremonial one is unclear, and opens a vein in your arm with the precision of a man trained on fruit. You bleed into a polished brass bowl, and the moment you feel faint, Wulfric grins and announces, that's the excess leaving the body. You nod weakly, or maybe you just slump. Once you are bandaged and seated on a stool that wobbles like it's having a moral crisis, Wulfric prepares your tonic. It's a blend of vinegar, crushed pearls, cinnamon, and just a hint of mercury, because what says balanced, mood like mild poisoning. This he claims is for your melancholy. You try to explain that what you're feeling isn't sadness, it's frustration, boredom, and the creeping awareness that everyone around you is slowly losing their minds. He nods sympathetically and adds more mercury. Now comes the astrology. Wulfric unfurls a large parchment showing the positions of the planets. He squints at a set of symbols that look like angry swans, consults a book that might actually be upside down, and proclaims that Saturn is currently in opposition to your spleen. This apparently explains your sore ankle, your bad dreams, and why your dog has been ignoring you. Historians still argue whether astrology was considered serious science or just ceremonial pageantry. In truth, it was probably both. The stars offered kings the illusion of order comforting, perhaps when nothing else made sense. Of course, it also gave physicians a celestial excuse for every leech-related misfire. Next comes the consultation of the urine wheel. A glass vial of your, well, is held up to the sunlight. There's a small skylight cut just for this. Wulfric swirls it thoughtfully. He declares it a little too lemon, not enough amber, then recommends fewer onions and more boiled trout. You make a note to have trout removed from the kitchens forever. He moves on to examining your pulse, which he claims reveals unspoken tensions. He frowns, reaches for a jar, hands you a boiled lizard tail soaked in honey. Chew this slowly, he says. It will ground the soul. It tastes like betrayal. And then the poultices. Cloth soaked in herbs is pressed against your temples. It drips. It stings. You pretend it helps. At this point, you'd agree to have your feet set on fire if it came with a promise of silence. Just as you think it's over, Wulfric mentions that your bile may be imbalanced. He recommends a purge possibly involving boiled rhubarb and 2 hours in a cold room. You decline politely. He makes a note anyway. Your personal barber surgeon arrives with a tray of instruments just in case anything else needs lancing. You wave him away before he can suggest lancing your feelings. Finally, you are declared medically sound, which means you are slightly anemic, emotionally numb, and smell like a dying herb garden, but you are no longer Wulfric's problem. As you stand to leave, your head spins. The bloodletting, the mercury, the poultices, they've all conspired to unsteady you. You grip the doorframe, the world tilting like a poorly built siege tower. A servant appears with a cup of warm broth. It helps. Slightly. Outside the corridor awaits. The next task looms. Another audience. Another smile. You straighten your robes, adjust your crown, and remind yourself once again that kings don't faint. At least not where anyone important can see. Royal marriage, royal distance. Ah, yes. The royal marriage, a sacred bond, a divine union, a lifelong partnership forged not by love or compatibility, but by the desperate political needs of two mildly unstable kingdoms with strong opinions about boundary rivers and cheese tariffs. You were married at 14, technically old enough to rule, but emotionally somewhere between terrified boy and grumpy badger. Your bride, also 14, or possibly 12. The records are unclear, and the scribes who might have clarified were all busy illustrating that week's tax reports with dancing griffins. She arrived with 3 trunks of embroidered napkins, a dowry the size of a small forest, and the emotional availability of a stone pillar. You remember her stepping off the carriage in a veil thick enough to qualify as fortification? She didn't smile. She didn't blink. You briefly considered faking a fainting spell. It wouldn't have helped. She speaks 4 words of your language. You speak none of hers. The early conversations went something like this. You. Bread. Her. Yes. You. Walk. Her. Yes. You. Sleep. Her. Yes. Then she rolled over and snored like a windmill, collapsing in slow motion. It was romantic. The court called it an alliance. The bards called it a blessing from God. You called it a strategic hostage exchange with paperwork. On your wedding night, you were paraded through the castle halls by a crowd of clapping drunk men doused in flower petals and cheap wine, and shoved into a chamber lit by far too many candles and not nearly enough explanation. She sat there motionless, wearing a crown of dried lilies and a look of quiet resolve, like someone who'd accepted her fate but wasn't going to pretend to enjoy it. You bowed. She blinked. Somewhere in the castle, someone played a lute out of tune. You lay beside each other like 2 particularly nervous sculptures. In the morning, the royal midwife inspected the sheets. There was much celebration. You weren't sure why. Neither of you had slept, but the symbolism was intact, and that's what mattered. Now, years later, the 2 of you are less husband and wife and more politically entangled coworkers who share custody of a kingdom. You take breakfast in separate rooms. You attend mass at different altars. You occasionally nod at each other across courtyards, like 2 ambassadors who once signed a treaty during an eclipse. Once a month, you exchange a sentence and a sigh. The advisors claim this is normal. That closeness breeds suspicion. That affection is a distraction. That a good marriage is like a fortress, impregnable, well-defended, and emotionally vacant. They quote examples. King Philip IV and Queen Joan of Navarre reportedly went 6 years without speaking and considered it a golden age of governance. One English monarch famously communicated with his wife exclusively through falcons for the better part of a decade. Still, there are moments. One evening, you caught her feeding a squirrel beneath the hedgerow. She smiled. It was the first time you saw her teeth. You almost asked her something real, something human. Then her maid appeared, and she vanished like smoke. Historians still argue whether royal couples ever shared true intimacy or merely functioned as living treaties with matching rings and opposite sleep schedules. Some unearthed letters suggest tenderness. Others read like livestock inventories. Yours, you never learned to read hers. She writes in the tongue of her homeland, a language made entirely of half prayers and long pauses. But she does occasionally send gifts, small ones, a silk ribbon, a pouch of dried lavender, a carved wooden comb, a poem badly translated by your steward but earnest. You once sent her a falcon. It pecked her favorite tapestry. She returned it with a ribbon around its neck. You think that meant something? Occasionally your bed is shared, politely, mechanically, like planting crops. An heir was produced, a small red-faced heir who screamed like his mother and kicked like his father. The court rejoiced. The bishop blessed him with a name longer than most fables. You tried to name him after your uncle. She insisted on a name from her homeland. The result was a compromise that sounds like a sneeze and cannot be embroidered without causing fights among the tailors. The local children still mispronounce it with enthusiasm. Raising him is a diplomatic effort in itself. You want him to be brave. She wants him to be careful. He wants to eat mud. So far, he's winning. Sometimes you lie awake wondering what life would have been like if you'd married someone you actually chose, someone who shared your humor, your language, your passion for soup, someone who didn't view you as a required clause in a peace treaty. But that's not how royalty works. You don't get love. You get legacy. You are a branch. She is another. The kingdom is the tree. You grow side by side, barely touching your roots, tangled but never quite intertwined. A single wind could split you both in half, but for now you hold. And when the nobles toast your enduring marriage, at feasts slurring their praise through mouthfuls of venison and diplomacy, you raise your goblet and smile like a man who knows exactly how much dried lavender fits in a pouch. Because you've counted. Because, after all, she's still here, and she still snores like a windmill. Religion as performance. Religion is not optional. Not for you. Not when you're king. In theory, you rule by divine right, which is a poetic way of saying, God wanted you on the throne, and he wasn't taking suggestions. At least that's what your chaplain tells you whenever you look like you're about to climb out a window and disappear into the woods. And so every morning, without fail, you attend Mass. You don't wake up to birdsong. You wake up to bells. Loud, insistent bells. Bells that echo through stone halls like unpaid debts calling you to perform the one royal duty that never gets easier. Spiritual performance art. You're led to the chapel by a slow-moving, tuneless parade of monks each humming in a different key. Swinging incense burners, like medieval air fresheners. The smoke hits your face and immediately triggers something in your sinuses. The scent is part frankincense, part scorched oregano, and mostly smothered guilt. You try not to sneeze. Again, the royal chapel is beautiful, in the same way a grandmother's scowl is beautiful. Ornate, full of judgment, and impossible to escape. The ceiling arches overhead like a stone brow furrowed in permanent disapproval. The stained glass windows beam holy light directly into your eyes, which feels a lot like divine targeting. You kneel on a cushion that somehow manages to be both too thin and too lumpy. Your legs immediately begin the countdown to pins and needles. You stare at the crucifix while trying to ignore the urge to check how much longer this will last. The priest begins in Latin. You understand most of it, enough to mumble in rhythm, enough to nod convincingly, and occasionally whisper something that could be either amen or almond. You mouth the syllables while mentally compiling a grocery list. Bread, cheese, fewer boiled turnips, maybe no mercury this week. You're expected to show reverence, but not just any reverence, kingly reverence, the rarefied kind that involves precisely time blinking, a look of cosmic concern, and exactly one humble bow performed as if your spinal cord has been anointed. You are, after all, God's appointed servant on earth. Never mind that you sometimes forget which apostle did what. You're pretty sure Thomas had doubts Peter did something with keys, and Judas absolutely ruined dinner for everyone. But as long as you tilt your chin upward during the Gloria and don't fidget during the Kyrie, no one questions your eternal soul. After Mass, you confess to a man who probably knows more about your bowel movements than your beliefs. Father Berengar greets you with the solemn energy of a man who's never once laughed and doesn't intend to start. You kneel again, this time on cold, unyielding stone, because true repentance apparently requires poor ergonomics and mild nerve damage. You whisper your sins into his ear. The usual, I coveted the stillness of the peasants. I wished illness upon the Earl of Draywick's left foot. I considered briefly walking into the woods and never returning. And then quietly, almost guiltily, I imagined setting fire to my own schedule. Berengar hums gravely. then with the divine efficiency of a man who knows how to forgive and monetize. At the same time, he prescribes your penance. 3 hours of silent prayer, a donation to the monastery suggested amount, your weight in silver, and, of course, another round of attending Mass. You thank him. You're not entirely sure why. Possibly out of habit. Possibly because he's the only person who listens to you without immediately asking for land a title or your daughter's hand in marriage. Historians still argue whether royal piety was heartfelt or mostly for show. Some say medieval kings were deeply devout, prone to spontaneous pilgrimage, self-flagellation, and the occasional barefoot procession through snow. Others argue that religion, like embroidery and jousting, was simply another tool of statecraft, a stage performance directed at god nobles and chroniclers. You believe it's both, because somewhere between the incense and the intonation, between the practiced bows and the quiet guilt, something occasionally stirs. When the choir sings a certain hymn, low and slow voices rising through the vaulted stone, a strange weight lifts from your chest. For just a moment the crown disappears. So do the robes, the laws, the eyes. You feel small, and strangely fine with that, until the sermon begins. Father Berengar has exactly one setting: thunderous. His voice reverberates like divine thunder being filtered through disapproval. Today's theme is sin, specifically yours. Without naming names, he references leaders of men who neglect the virtues of humility, temperance, and timely tax reform. You sit there, expression carved from stone, while half the court glances at you in that subtle, courtly way. Half eyebrow, half implication. You consider blinking twice to indicate that, yes, you got the message. You do not blink. You stare forward as kings do and accept your portion of God's subtle wrath. At the end of the service, Berengar sprinkles holy water over your forehead, your hands, and your ceremonial scepter, because apparently even objects of authority require divine rinse cycles. You are reminded that power is a loan from the heavens, that death is certain, that hell is patient, and that your body is not yours, but a clay vessel of holy obligation. You try not to sigh or sneeze. The chapel doors creak open. The cold rushes in like an accusation. Your knees crack as you stand, joints complaining like old advisors. And just like that, your devotions are complete. You will be back here tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, because being king doesn't just mean making laws. It doesn't just mean commanding armies or hosting dangerous feasts. It means kneeling for hours on cold stone floors, nodding at sermons designed to scold you, and pretending just long enough to get through the next hymn that you didn't spend half of Mass fantasizing about becoming a fisherman, and maybe, just maybe, trying to believe it still matters. The diplomatic dinner. It's diplomatic feast day one of those red-letter horrors your steward circled weeks ago with the urgency of a man trying to avert a civil war using poultry and parchment. Tonight, you're hosting a foreign monarch, a guest in the same way a fox might be considered a guest in a henhouse. Only this fox wears sapphire rings on every finger, travels with a choir, and brings a peace treaty folded around a knife. You're not entirely sure why this meeting is happening. Something about borders, tariffs, and the disputed ownership of a river, or was it a mountain shaped like a sleeping cow? It doesn't matter. The important thing is that whatever this is, it could easily end in either an alliance or a small regional war triggered by a pastry. The Great Hall has been scrubbed to within an inch of its ancient dignity. The rushes are fresh. The torches are refueled. The tapestries, some of which depict battles you lost, have been subtly rearranged to feature your better cheekbone. The rats have been politely asked to vacate. Even Duke Nibbles is for tonight on strategic retreat. The foreign monarch arrives in a blur of velvet perfume and self-satisfaction. His horse is overdecorated. His cloak has too many tassels. His crown, taller, shinier, and clearly compensating, wobbles slightly with every step. He smiles at you with the warmth of a man who's already imagined your funeral 3 times before breakfast. His beard is suspiciously symmetrical, his teeth unnaturally white. His entourage hums with choreographed efficiency, not a single guard blinking out of rhythm. This is how you know he's planning something. You meet him at the threshold and immediately begin the ancient passive-aggressive ballet of monarch to monarch interaction. Ah, your crown is weighty, you say? As is your kingdom's debt, he replies, still smiling. It begins. You both sit at the long polished table, strategically elevated so that neither head appears higher than the others, lest someone interpret neck height as territorial claim. The table settings have been placed using a 3-generation-old protocol scroll. You're not allowed to touch the goblet before he does. He's not allowed to wipe his mouth until you've wiped yours first. Diplomatic etiquette, basically swordplay without blades. The food arrives, slowly, deliberately. Each course a test of nerves and taste buds. Roasted boar, buttered turnips, glazed pigeon, something that might be eel pretending to be pie. The tension is so thick it could be ladled, but you don't eat, not yet, because feasting between kings is less about nourishment and more about symbolism. Which dish you taste first, how deeply you sip your wine, whether you tear your bread or slice it, everything sends a message. Last year, a king was nearly excommunicated for buttering his pottage in the wrong direction. Allegedly, it implied conquest. You select a piece of venison, he selects the same, a gesture of unity or of mutual suspicion. Your taster, a brave man with no sense of smell, and 3 surviving cousins, takes the first bite. He doesn't collapse. You proceed. The toasts come next. Each one is a riddle in the shape of a compliment. To peace that endures like a stone, unless someone moves the stone. To your noble bloodline, may it never be too diluted. To the health of your horses, and the loyalty of your generals. You raise your goblet and offer a few poetic jabs in return, all of them couched in Latin because nothing says, "Don't test me," quite like conjugated threats. Historians still argue whether these royal feasts were meaningful diplomatic rituals or just an elaborate excuse for powerful men to outsmirk each other while trying not to be poisoned. Some monarchs signed treaties, others signed autopsy reports. An alarming number of peace talks ended with one guest slumping face first into a stuffed pheasant, while everyone pretended not to notice until dessert. Speaking of which, roast duck is served. Crisped skin, glossy glaze. The scent alone could broker a truce. You glance at your taster. He glances at the duck, then back at you, then theatrically drops his fork and spends 2 minutes under the table retrieving it. You decide to skip the duck. Your guest carves into his portion with suspicious glee. You smile. He smiles. You both pretend not to see the steward in the corner holding a tray slightly too tightly, or the bard in the rafters sweating profusely through his lace collar. At some point, a performance is arranged. A bard sings in your honor. You suspect the lyrics were translated poorly or possibly weaponized. His majesty shines despite his kingdom's weather. And decisions, the bard croons. You thank him anyway, through your teeth. Next, the gift exchange. You present him with an ornate goblet hand forged, gold-lined, engraved with your family crest, and a subtle reminder that you once conquered 3 provinces on a Tuesday. He offers you a mechanical burr. Wind it up, press the beak, and it sings your anthem. Almost. The last note is wrong. Deliberately wrong. A message. Or just bad craftsmanship. Or both. Either way, you now own a bird that sings treason. The feast nears its end. Your guest monarch rises, goblet-raised eyes gleaming. To kings who know when to listen and when to strike. You match his gaze, raise yours. To kings who never miss. When it matters, the room goes silent. Then mercifully everyone laughs a little too hard. The bard plays something merry. The wine flows again. The scribes begin drafting a treaty that neither of you plans to honor past next Tuesday. And just like that, diplomacy is complete. You both pose for the artist, sketching the moment for future tapestries. You both grin like men who've just buried a dagger under the table and agreed not to talk about it. You both begin mentally counting your border patrols. You retire to your chamber cloak, heavy with formality, head heavier with what-ifs. You're still hungry. You ask for bread. Just plain bread. Because nothing ever goes wrong over bread. Unless, of course, someone hides a note in it. But that's tomorrow's problem. The scroll arrives at dawn sealed in wax, written in haste, and smeared slightly with what you hope is wax. It carries one of the great medieval truths. There is war. Again, no one is surprised. Not your advisors who immediately begin drafting letters of denial, apology, and conditional outrage, sometimes all on the same page. Not your knights who've been sharpening their swords loudly in public like peacocks with steel. Not even your horse, who has developed a suspicious limp every time the word campaign is uttered within 3 hallways. The cause of this particular war, hazy at best. Something about a disputed forest, a miscounted dowry, or your cousin allegedly insulting a neighboring duke's beard in Latin accidentally, but also possibly while drunk. The real reason, of course, is that if you don't show up in armor, someone will write a song about it, and not the good kind. Because in your world, weak is just another word for historically irrelevant, a fate worse than death, and far more permanent. Your armor is prepared. It smells of damp iron resignation and the faint ghost of last year's failed campaign against that rogue bishop and his suspiciously well trained goats. The chainmail digs into your shoulders like a grudge, and the breastplate, once custom fit, now resists your rib cage thanks to stress and a rather committed pudding habit. Still, your squires wrestle you into it like you're a reluctant sausage. You thank them. You don't mean it. The rain begins before you reach the gate. Of course it does. It always rains during war prep. It's tradition. Somewhere, King Philippe IV is probably sipping hot wine under a dry roof and muttering classic weather for a northern fool. You picture him smiling in his wool slippers next to his cat. You ride out anyway. You're accompanied by a grand procession of knights, banners flapping like nervous declarations, trumpets wailing like geese that studied opera. The peasants cheer, either because they're inspired or were paid in turnips. You nod heroically. You attempt to look noble. You attempt to look dry. You are not dry. By the time you reach the edge of your realm, your boots squelch, your gloves leak. Your crown is wrapped in wax cloth like yesterday's cheese, and your royal undergarments have adhered to your thighs with all the intimacy of betrayal. And then camp. A sprawling expanse of mud confusion shouting and tents that look structurally skeptical. Fires sputter. Horses complain. Soldiers argue about dice soup and whether this war has an official name yet. You are led to your tent. It is, of course, slightly larger than the others, which means it leaks from 2 places instead of 5. Your cot is uneven. The blanket smells like the last man who died under it, and possibly during it. You consider lying down. Then someone bursts in with a map and the phrase urgent strategic update. These updates usually involve pointing at vague hills and saying things like, "We should take that one," followed by murmured eyes and a scribe drawing little X's with dramatic flair. You nod gravely. You do not mention that you once got lost in your own orchard. That night you sleep in shards. Coughing echoes through the camp. Someone sharpens a blade too close to your tent. Someone else is snoring into what might be a drum. You wrap yourself tighter in the scratchy wool, dreaming not of victory or glory, but of soup. Real soup, with herbs, with flavor, with no horse. Historians still argue whether kings actually led their armies or simply appeared near the action just long enough to be painted looking windswept. Some records describe monarchs in gleaming armor, sword raised, eyes blazing. Others suggest they remained in the command tent sipping weak ale and asking repeatedly why everything smelled like wet cabbage. You wake before dawn. Your joints ache. Your crown resting on a stool looks slightly smug. A page brings your breakfast. Hard bread and a wedge of something that may once have been cheese, but now resembles a philosophy problem. You chew slowly. A pigeon outside stares at you with disdain. You stare back. You lose. And then it's time to march. Through forests that seem to lean in too close. Over hills that were not this steep in the map sketches. Through mist that clings to your armor like unpaid taxes. Your knights grumble. Your squires grumble. Even the banners seem to droop. Eventually you reach the enemy stronghold. A stone lump on a distant hill encircled by arrogance, bad decisions, and a moat filled with something that definitely isn't just water. You squint at it. It squints back. The siege begins, which mostly involves waiting and shouting and more waiting. Occasionally someone fires a flaming arrow. Occasionally someone forgets which direction to fire it. You sit in your tent. You write a stirring message to be read aloud to the troops. It includes words like honor, valor, and destiny. You try not to use the word damp, even though it is the only honest descriptor of your life right now. Sometimes you nap, not proper sleep. Siege sleep, the kind where you lie stiffly in armor, listening for betrayal, dysentery, or someone yelling fire in the wrong context. You dream of home, of clean sheets, of chairs that don't fold. One afternoon, your crown slips off while you're dozing. You don't pick it up. It looks more comfortable on the ground. Eventually, the enemy sues for peace. Not in person, of course. They send an emissary, gaunt, shivering, draped in soggy velvet, and the unmistakable aura of someone who hasn't slept since the bread ran out. He carries a white flag, a scroll, and the strained expression of a man who's just spent a week rationing raisins. He bows. You nod. Neither of you pretends it's about honor. It's about survival. Maybe your tactics worked. Maybe your midnight arrow volleys hit something other than trees. Maybe they realized that the only thing more demoralizing than siege warfare is siege weather. The moat has begun to ferment, the archers are sharing lice, and even the catapults look like they've given up. More likely they just ran out of things to argue about. Kingdoms, after all, can only trade insults about lineage borders and questionable grain tariffs for so long before someone finally says, fine. The terms are hastily drafted, 2 copies, neither of which match. There's a ceremonial handshake, a symbolic exchange of cloaks. Someone insists on a Latin blessing no one understands. You sign with your royal flourish. They sign with theirs. Somewhere in the fine print, your name is spelled wrong. Twice. You don't correct it. You just want to go home. And so you do. You mount your horse, now slightly less opposed to movement, and begin the long, muddy ride back to your kingdom. The journey is slower, quieter. The trumpets are there, but they've lost some enthusiasm. The banners are limp. The knights smile like men who know they'll be writing new wills next month. Still, the peasants come out to greet you. They wave. They cheer. Some hold signs. Some hold turnips. One throws a chicken that misses your head by polite intention. You nod regal and drenched. You wave. You think about bathing. You are sore. You are soaked. You are on some level spiritually pickled. Your crown scratched, slightly dented, and still wrapped in waxed cloth rides in a separate pouch, like a spoiled child being carried home from market. And when you finally arrive, cloaked in mud and melancholy, the gates open. The court greets you. Pages run. Horns echo. Somewhere, a bard begins composing a song with words like glorious, valiant, and mostly upright. You dismount with a squelch. You enter the keep. You nod to your steward. You ignore the ambassador waiting in the corner. You ask for soup. Not because you're hungry. Not exactly. But because soup means you're no longer in a tent. No longer pointing at hills. No longer standing ankle deep in heroic puddles. The bowl arrives. It steams. It smells familiar. You lift the spoon. You sip. It tastes like chicken. Probably, but you don't ask. Not tonight. Tonight the war is over. At least, this one. You return from war not to celebration, but to silence. Not the reverent kind. Not the relieved kind. The other kind. The kind that hangs in the corridors like bad prophecy. Too still. Too clean. The kind of silence that feels like the kingdom is holding its breath and sharpening its knives. Your boots echo louder than usual on the stone. The guards shift too slowly, avoid your gaze too deliberately. The steward drops his scrolls, not once, not twice, but 3 times, then laughs a little too loud about it. Even the rats seem smug, which is saying something because last time they nearly voted themselves a duchy. Something's off. It always is. Because in this job, if you can call it that, betrayal isn't a risk. It's protocol. You don't just inherit a crown. You inherit a kingdom's worth of paranoia and ambition. And relatives, especially the relatives, you sit on a throne shaped like authority and rigged like a trap. You are addressed as Your Grace, Your Majesty, Your Radiance. But behind every syllable is the sound of someone calculating whether your death might be more convenient than your life. Still, you smile. You always smile. That's the first thing they teach you when you become king. Pretend you don't notice. Today you attend court. Again, the same stone chamber, the same banners, the same decorative suits of armor, one of which contains, you're fairly certain, a spy named Reynold who's been missing since the spring thaw. You take your place at the high seat flanked by your council, a rotating cast of anxious sycophants and enthusiastic backstabbers. The chancellor stands at your side, eyes flicking across the room, lips curled into a smile that's been ironed into place. You remember vividly that only 2 winters ago he backed your cousin as a more flexible option for succession. You forgave him, publicly, but privately you made sure his new horse had 3 different names and 1 unpredictable temperament. Then there's the Marshal of Arms, loyal, loud, good with a sword, too good. Recently seen exchanging coded letters with a duchess who once hosted a rebellion by accident complete with hors d'oeuvres and a lute band. That's never ideal. Lady Meridell offers you honeyed dates. You eat one. Slowly. She's been unusually generous with the clergy lately. 3 donations in 2 weeks, and a new stained glass window that suspiciously resembles her cheekbones. Lord Varnes requests a private meeting. You decline, loudly. Historians still argue whether kings truly wielded absolute power or merely served as ceremonial lightning rods for other people's bad decisions. Some say monarchs dictated law with iron will and divine sanction. Others argue they were figureheads in a theater of fear, surrounded by whispers, manipulated by money, and occasionally tossed out a tower window in accordance with tradition. You believe both are true. You are king, and you are very, very replaceable. You lift your goblet, pause. You sniff, nothing obvious. But poison is rarely obvious. Poison is subtle. It prefers plausible deniability. Sometimes it doesn't kill you outright. It simply makes you weaken mysteriously so that when you fall off your horse or down a staircase or into a well, people just nod wisely and say, "Poor man, lost his balance." Sad, really? So you sip, slowly, you wait. So far, no hallucinations. That's good. The last monarch to ignore his instincts ended up hosting a feast for 12 before collapsing into his own duck. They still sing songs about the duck. Across the hall, a group of nobles whisper. When you approach, they scatter. One leaves a scroll tucked under a cushion. You open it later in private. It's blank. That's worse than a threat. A threat at least tells you who's aiming. During petitions, a southern merchant presents you with a rare fruit known only to distant lands. It's wrinkled, vivid green, smells like melted wax and quiet suffering. You thank him with royal grace, hand it to your food taster, and watch the man pale bow and disappear to conduct tests. You never see him again. Later, your chamberlain leans in, voice soft and cautious. "Your Majesty, it may be time to refresh the advisory council," which is code for start chopping heads before someone schedules yours. You think of Lord Varnes and his sudden fascination with guard rotations, of Lady Meridell and her charitable impulses, of the Chancellor who's recently become fond of solitude. Usually a sign of plotting or indigestion, sometimes both. Beheadings, of course, must be public. Discreet loyalty is nice, but visible fear keeps things tidy. The scaffold is scrubbed. The executioner Thorn arrives, a man built like a bookshelf and twice as expressive. You announce 3 dismissals. 2 retire quietly to suspiciously well-furnished country estates. Lord Varnes objects. You raise a single eyebrow. He stops. An hour later, there's 1 fewer seat at the council table, and the crows are unusually fat. Justice in this kingdom is swift, but never satisfying, because for every neck you sever 2 more turn up behind you, wearing new clothes and different titles. Betrayal isn't a moment, it's a system. A rotating cast of familiar faces with new daggers and better excuses, and so you smile, always smile. Even when your dinner cutlery changes, slightly heavier, slightly curved. New supplier says the steward, of course. You eat slowly, chew thoughtfully, count bites. You excuse yourself early. You return to your chamber where the locks are checked thrice. The windows sealed. The bedding searched for needles, powders, or letters from your cousin beginning with, "Dearest sovereign," about your horse. You sleep in armor now. Light armor. Just enough to matter. Your dagger rests beneath the pillow. Your crown off your head for once. Sits beside you on the nightstand, glinting like a disappointed parent. And as you lie in the half-dark, half-dreaming, you remember something your mother whispered the night before your coronation. Trust no one who bows too low, and never trust anyone who smiles when they offer you fruit. You didn't understand it then. You do now. But most of all, you should have listened to yourself. Because you've always known this. No one plots against you harder than someone who says they never would. Night descends not like a curtain, but like a tax audit, quiet, suffocating, and full of implications. You don't notice it at first. One moment the courtyard hums with the dull throb of duty. Guards barking orders, hooves echoing over wet stone. The occasional sigh of a man wondering what his life would have been if he'd pursued pottery. Then suddenly it all fades. The sky deepens, the torches flicker lower, the castle exhales. And you are reminded that the only thing lonelier than ruling a kingdom is trying to sleep in one. Your chamber doors creak open with theatrical reluctance. A chorus of 3 people enters, your chamberlain, a squire, and someone from the clerical office who insists that transcribing your bedtime schedule is a sacred duty. You don't ask his name. You once did. He recited 7 generations of his family tree, all of whom apparently documented noble insomnia for a living. Your chamber, despite being royal, resembles a monk's cell that was given a small inheritance. It's tall, narrow, and cold in the way that only stone with delusions of grandeur can be. The windows are arrow slits, functional during sieges, useless during stargazing. A single torch struggles against the gloom, casting shadows that make even your own shoes seem judgmental. The bed, such as it is a raised wooden plank, topped with what your steward insists is a finely stuffed mattress. You suspect it's filled with discarded poultry feathers and unresolved grudges. The blanket embroidered with your family crest is equal parts wool and political metaphor. Heavy, coarse, and too short on both ends. You begin to disrobe with assistance. Of course, a king does not simply undress. That would suggest independence, and we can't have that. Your squire removes your outer robe, then your second outer robe, then the third layer, which is more decorative than functional, and was added last year by a fashion-forward bishop. Each garment comes off with the solemnity of a religious rite. You're finally left in a linen tunic that smells faintly of lavender and exhaustion. Your chamberlain removes your crown with practiced reverence, placing it on a red velvet cushion beside your bed. You nod as if this is meaningful. Inside you exhale like a mule being unsaddled. Your temples throb where the metal rested too long. Your scalp itches. You resist the urge to scratch it. Kings do not scratch. They summon someone else to ponder the itch until it goes away or becomes symbolic. The chamberlain gestures discreetly toward the chamber pot in the corner. You glance. It is frozen. Again, a masterpiece of winter's spite and poor insulation. You say nothing. Neither does he. He just nods as if to say yes. Sire, your own bodily functions have once again been defeated by medieval plumbing. Eventually they leave, or rather, they step out of the room and into the alcove behind the curtain. You can still hear them, breathing, occasionally whispering. Once someone sneezes and tries to turn it into a Latin blessing, it doesn't work. You lie down slowly like a man negotiating with furniture. The bed creaks like it's offended. The blanket resists your every movement. You shift. It shifts back. Somewhere, a flea throws a party. You stare up at the rafters, wondering which beam will creak next, and whether it's worth assigning a court inspector to investigate the structural integrity of your ceiling. You probably won't, though. He'd find something. They always do. And then it becomes a whole scandal about safety protocols and sleep-related liability. You close your eyes, not in pursuit of sleep, but in pursuit of less awareness. It doesn't work. A breeze threads through the arrow slit. It smells like wet stone old firewood and distant regret. It tugs at the torch. The flame sputters. You sigh and the sound bounces off the walls, uncomfortably intimate. Your mind, ever the rebel, refuses to wind down. It replays the day like a badly edited play. The feast. The duck. The toast that may or may not have been a veiled threat. The bard whose lyrics strayed suspiciously into commentary. Your cousin's smile. Your cousin's scroll. Your cousin. Your left foot cramps. You sit up. You mutter something about divine punishment and press your foot into the cold stone floor until the spasm subsides. You wonder if Emperor Manuel in Constantinople ever dealt with foot cramps, or if his floors were heated by smug Byzantine engineers with access to warm stones and superior arch support. You briefly envy him. Then you remember he also had 7 assassination attempts and a rebellious niece with a sword collection. You call it even outside a bell tolls midnight. You flinch, not because of the time, but because that bell's never rung, unless someone has died, or someone is trying to sound important about a rat sighting. You hope it's the latter. Historians still argue whether kings slept better than their subjects. Some say yes, more blankets, fewer fleas. Others argue no more anxiety, more scheming, more embroidered nightmares. One particularly grumpy scholar once declared that the royal pillow was stuffed not with feathers, but with curses, ghosts, and expectations. You've never related to anyone more. Eventually sleep comes, or something like it. It's not rest. Not truly. It's a hovering sort of consciousness, a murky twilight where thoughts keep knocking on your skull like beggars at a banquet. You drift. You don't dream of battle or conquest. You dream of silence. And in that silence, just for a flicker of time, you are nobody. And it's beautiful. The bell is still echoing when you open your eyes again, though whether it woke you or merely interrupted your not sleep is unclear. You're not sure what time it is anymore. Time has become more of a rumor than a certainty, something the clergy insists exists, but only in increments of penance and fasting. All you know is that it's later than before, earlier than comfort, and exactly the wrong hour to be thinking about your soul. The torch is out. The chamber has cooled to the temperature of betrayal. Your breath fogs faintly in the dark as you sit up slowly, blanket clinging to you like an obligation you can't shake off. A guard's cough echoes faintly down the corridor. Someone stirs just beyond the curtain, your chamberlain probably, ever vigilant, ever upright, possibly undead. You stare at the crown beside your bed, its gold dulled by shadow. It looks different at night, smaller, like it knows it doesn't belong here, like it's embarrassed to have followed you into the one place meant for rest. And maybe it is, because no matter how divine your mandate, you're still just a man in a room with bad insulation, haunted rafters, and the kind of loneliness that echoes. You lie back down gently this time, as if trying not to disturb yourself. You close your eyes again and expect nothing. Instead, something arrives, a dream, or maybe a memory, or maybe some strange mix of both, the way certain smells trigger lost afternoons, or the way you sometimes remember things that never happened. This time you're not in the castle. You're not even in the kingdom. You're walking through a city you've never seen but somehow recognize, not as a king, not as a man of note, just walking. Anonymity feels like a second skin soft, breathable, profoundly underrated. No guards, no fanfare. No one yelling, "Your Majesty," every time you sneeze. The sky is gray in that pleasant English sort of way. No drama, just an agreement to be overcast. The buildings lean slightly like they're tired of being vertical. The streets smell of wet bread and chimney smoke. You pass children playing with sticks and rules they made up 5 minutes ago. No one bows. No one kneels. A shopkeeper bumps your shoulder and says, "Watch it, friend." And friend, that word, it strikes you deeper than any title you've ever owned. You sit on a bench. It creaks but doesn't complain. You buy a roasted chestnut from a vendor with no teeth but limitless joy. You eat it while watching dogs chase each other in chaotic, joyous spirals. The dream has weight, smell, sound, texture. You are here. You are nowhere. You are free. And then out of the periphery, someone calls your name. Not your royal title. Not sire or majesty or defender of the realm. Your name. The one your mother whispered before your first coronation. The one almost no one says anymore because it isn't useful to them. The name before the titles. The name before the duties. The name that still remembers how to laugh. You turn to see who said it, but the dream folds in on itself, like silk vanishing into smoke. You're back. Stone walls. Cold air. Blanket. Crown. Chamberlain-shaped silhouette behind the curtain. A rat squeaks in the corner. Probably Duke Nibbles again. You're considering naming him Minister of Silence, mostly to see if anyone would object. You turn on your side. The mattress protests with a spring-loaded groan. You stare at the wall. The mortar between the stones is cracked, a small detail you've noticed every night, but never fixed. You're not sure why. Maybe because fixing it would suggest permanence, and you've never truly believed any of this was permanent. Your mind drifts again slower this time. Not into a field, not into a dream. Just sideways. You imagine your friend King Sigurd of Norway, whom you haven't written to in 5 winters. Last you heard, he'd taken to growing carrots and composing psalms in his garden. Or was it psalms about carrots? Either way, he's probably asleep right now. Warm, snoring, untroubled. Or dead. That's always a possibility. Monarchs tend to vanish mid-sentence. You wonder if your other friend, the one with the laugh that broke protocol ever, did escape. You heard rumors that he became a monk in Cyprus, or a spice merchant in Cairo, or a ghost in someone else's story. You hope whatever the truth he got to sit under a tree and eat something without an agenda. You shift beneath the woolen tapestry blanket. A corner brushes your face like a sarcastic flag. You stare at the ceiling again where shadows flicker from nothing. For a moment, you imagine carving a message up there. Something stupid. Something real. Just for yourself. Something like, I was here. I tried. I almost made it. But, of course, kings don't get graffiti. They get legacies, carved by others. You close your eyes once more, not to dream, but to vanish, just briefly, into the soft place between who you are and who you wish you could have been. A shepherd, a fisherman, a man who laughs without a kingdom hanging from his ribs. Outside a bell tolls the hour again, not to wake you, but to remind you there are only so many left. The end comes not with fanfare or prophecy, but as a cough. A quiet one at first, persistent, apologetic, like it doesn't want to disturb you, and then louder, deeper, until it begins to hollow you out from the inside like termites in old wood. You ignore it at first. You have audiences to attend scrolls, to glance at a falconry demonstration, to nod politely through. You are, after all, the king. Sickness is for courtiers. But your body no longer believes in ceremony. The stairs grow taller. The daylight feels colder. The world leans slightly to the left. And your robes have become suspiciously heavier, though. That might just be the guilt finally catching up. The physician says it's a chill in the lungs. He prescribes boiled herbs and strong wine, and doesn't meet your eyes. The court chaplain unhelpfully recommends repentance. The astrologer stares grimly into a bowl of water and suggests postponing all important decisions until the moon changes its mind. But you know better. You're dying. Not dramatically, not poetically, not with a dagger in your back or a goblet at your lips, just slowly like wax melting in an empty chapel. It's not romantic. It's not even all that interesting. Just inevitable. You move less. You speak less. The courtiers whisper more. You catch glimpses of your son strutting through the halls, already practicing your posture. You catch your reflection and don't recognize the man staring back. A man with tired eyes. A man with regrets tucked into every wrinkle. And so one night you make a choice. You send everyone away. No guards. No scribe. No chamberlain. Not even the man who watches you sleep in case you forget to wake up. You light a single candle. You put on the old robe, the one from your coronation night, when you were young and foolish enough to believe in permanence. You sit. You think, not about glory, not about the battles you won, or the treaties you signed, or the statues already planned in your likeness. You think about your daughter's laugh, about your wife's hands when they weren't trembling, about that shepherd you saw once years ago singing badly to himself as he tended his flock on a hill you could never name. You remember something your father said once late at night when he thought you were asleep? The crown doesn't protect you from loneliness. It guarantees it. You hadn't understood then. Now you do. You think about legacy, a word your advisors love. You were supposed to build one, protect one, leave one. But it always felt like trying to draw your name in sand while the tide was coming in. Yes, there will be songs. There are always songs. They'll paint your reign as noble, your decisions as wise, your punishments as fair. They'll blame your cruelties on necessity and your failures on fate. They'll embroider your life into banners that hang long after your name has lost all meaning. But they won't know you. They won't know how badly you wanted to be good. How often you almost were. How often you bit your tongue instead of your enemies. They won't know about the letter you wrote to your son and burned before sunrise. They won't know that sometimes, just sometimes, you dreamed of being forgotten. You kneel before the crucifix one last time. Not for politics, not for ritual, just for peace. The words of the old prayer slip from your tongue like they've been waiting. You don't ask for heaven, just forgiveness. Forgive me, for I have ruled. You confess the sins that never made it into sermons. I judged too quickly. I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I worshipped order more than justice. I feared the people I claimed to serve. I kept the crown even when I wanted to throw it into the sea. Silence follows, thick and unyielding, but it feels less heavy this time. You lie down. The crown sits on its cushion beside you. You don't wear it. You've earned one night with nothing on your head but sleep. And as your eyes flutter, you feel not dread, not pain, but something like loosening, not just of breath, but of role, of burden. You are no longer the man who must make decrees before breakfast. You are no longer the body through which a kingdom breathes. You are just a man, and you sleep, not like a king, not like a symbol, but like someone who finally has nothing to prove. Outside the castle, breathes. The torches by the main gate flicker low. The halls no longer echo. The quills lie still. The bells do not ring. The throne room, usually alive with fabric rustling voices, rising scrolls, unrolling, sits in holy silence. Even the rats tread quietly tonight, as if aware that someone has ended. And in the highest chamber beneath the weight of velvet, too old to shimmer, one figure lies still. No advisors, no signatures, no bows, just the faint rise and fall of a chest. And then even that soft rhythm lets go. The king is gone, but this story is not about death. Not really. It's about release. It's about the moment the performance ends and the actor steps off stage. And yes, you feel it now, don't you? That small warm hum curling around your heart, that subtle exhale you didn't know you were holding. It's all right. You can set it down. The titles, the weight, the schedule, the constant performance of self. Tonight, let your thoughts drift like banners in a forgotten breeze. Let the battles fade behind you. Let your crown rest beside your bed. There is no duty now. No need to smile. No reason to stay awake. You're not a king. You're not a subject. You're simply someone who's earned the right to sleep. So go on. Close your eyes. Let the night take its turn. The kingdom can wait.